is it time we kick cancel culture to the curb? Tom Slater is the deputy editor of Spiked Online. He thinks the mad response to this letter signed by J.K. Rowling, people accusing it as racism, has proved its point. But Benjamin Butterworth, the late editor of the newspaper, says it's not about people being cancelled, it's about people being held to account, and privileged straight white men have been able to do what they want forever unchallenged. Benjamin, it's not just straight white men who get cancelled, though, is it?
I mean, look, I think the point of the debate we're having at the moment is that for so long, straight white men have been able to say what they want, control what people hear, be in charge of the whole of society. And in recent years, social media has seen all sorts of different people, for good and for bad, get a platform, be able to respond, to assert their power. And I think some people have found that a shock, that when they make comments about, for example, black people or trans people, that those people can now argue back. And the truth is, this isn't a debate about freedom of speech. This is a debate about some people's fear of freedom of consequences to their speech.
But Tom Slater, is it right that the consequence of making a point on Twitter, a 280-character tweet, is that you lose your livelihood and your job?
Well, that's exactly the point, because no one actually believes that freedom of speech comes with no consequences, that anyone should be able to say anything they like and not face criticism. That's exactly the point of freedom of speech. But the point of this letter, I think it's worth noting that it was organised actually by a black guy, a guy called Thomas Jackson Williams, signed by many non-white and non-straight white male people, so I think that's a bit of a misnomer in this debate, is to say that that shouldn't come at the cost of people trying to hound you out of your livelihood. There's a real conflation that goes on the other side of this debate. Say this is just criticism. No, what we're talking about is often quite organised campaigns to deprive that person of their job, to put pressure on their employer because they dare to utter a wrong thought. Everyone is up for criticism. Everyone is up for debate. The problem is that there are certain things which a very small but very vocal group of people have decided you're not allowed to say, and they're quite willing to try and hound you out of a livelihood if you hold that position. That's the problem that we're talking about here.
Well, indeed, because Benjamin Butterworth, let's take the case of J.K. Rowling and let's break this down. Let me ask you first, Benjamin, do you accept that J.K. Rowling has not said anything relating to trans people that is illegal or would be considered hate speech? Do you accept that?
I think she's courted an enormous amount of hate and caused an enormous amount of hurt to the people which she's talking about.
Okay, that's fine. But do you accept that she hasn't said anything that would be considered illegal or hate speech?
Yeah, I don't think there's any sort of legal proceedings.
So you concede that. So why is it acceptable for her livelihood to be challenged? And to be honest, Benjamin, if she wasn't the most successful, powerful author in the world, I have no doubt that her publishers would have cut and run in an instant after the massive pressure that has come on from all sorts, including other authors employed, for example, by her publishing company. Why? Because she doesn't hold a view that the liberal elite hold. How was that acceptable for her to be cancelled for that? I know you strongly disagree with her views, and you have a right to strongly disagree, but surely you understand that she has a right to hold those views.
You know, in a way, you hit the nail on the head of the absurdity of this. J.K. Rowling's income and livelihood is not under threat from people disagreeing with her. She is a billionaire in dollars. She has sold more books than almost anybody else. The fact is that it is only people like her who get the platform to spread hate as they wish to, and that she has in recent weeks.
She would deny that's what she's doing.
But the fact is that when people like her make those comments, they need to accept there are repercussions. She said the other day on Twitter that she's sick of being talked over. You can't talk over a woman with 14 million followers. She's not being talked over. She's facing consequences for what she says and people arguing back. The idea that J.K. Rowling has been cancelled when she's been in just about every newspaper in the Western world for the past month giving her views. Name to me one trans person who has the platform anything like J.K. Rowling. The truth is, it's not J.K. Rowling being cancelled. It's the way our society and our media is structured that stops minorities even getting their voice in the first place half the time.
Tom Slater, I agree that J.K. Rowling is probably one of the few people in the world that are impossible to cancel. Donald Trump, I would put in the category of another one. But the point that I'm trying to make, Tom, is that if J.K. Rowling were a moderately successful author, she would have been dumped by now, and she would have been cancelled by polite society.
Well, that's exactly what has happened. And if you actually read the letter, the point that many of them, the point that they make in that letter is that it's not really about us. You know, we are people of privilege, we are people with certain means. Even if we did get quote unquote cancelled, we'd probably be okay. The problem are the people below you, the problem are the people who don't have that platform. And then we saw a perfect illustration of that in this past week. So there's a woman called Gillian Phillips, who's a best-selling children's author. She's been sacked by a publisher for expressing support for J.K. Rowling. There was another case that was cited in the letter of David Shaw, who's a Democratic political data analyst. He lost his job because he literally just tweeted a study which made a factual claim about the link between violent protests and support for the Republicans going up. This is all he did, and yet he was hounded out for being seen to, you know, commit some sort of heresy against Black Lives Matter. The point here is not J.K. Rowling. The point here is not Donald Trump. Yes, there is a kind of slightly unhinged attempt to cancel what are effectively uncancelable people. But the problem that we're expressing here, and the real issue, is the fact that people further down the tree, people who don't have that kind of platform, are being hit by this as well. And I'm in no doubt that there are many, many cases, even outside the world of publishing and the media, that we never hear about, who are subject to precisely this kind of treatment as well.
Well, yeah, and Benjamin, I guess maybe you don't know what it feels like, and I don't actually say that in a patronising way, because you are a member of the London liberal media elite, you sit on the left, and most of the topics that you opine on, Twitter tends to agree with you. But if you sit outside that acceptable Twitter space, I can tell you it's not a particularly comfortable place to be in. And my concern, Benjamin, is that fear of cancellation, it's the fear that is going through so many people's head, is actually having a chilling effect on debate.
But, you know, I mean, I have been on the receiving end of a cancel argument for something very silly. A few years ago, I tweeted twice over a few years about trying sushi for the first time. And these tweets were found and they went viral. It was the second trending topic on Twitter that night. So I've been on the receiving end of a kind of mass attack over something that was incredibly meaningless, that wasn't offensive. And the truth is, I think you have to distinguish between the nasty behaviour of some, which happens whether it's on social media, in businesses, or in national newspapers, which are sometimes the most brutal of all, versus the fact that there is a moral and ethical boundary here for issues like racism and homophobia and bigotry. And the truth is that I think the claim of cancel culture is aiming to dilute people confronting genuine issues, like when people are racist. You know, the idea of the man that flew a White Lives Matter banner over his football club. You know, he was right to lose his job because it was clear. Absolutely.
Why?
Because it was clear not only
he'd done nothing illegal.
But he was, first of all, he was objecting to Black Lives Matter, which everyone accepts is to stand up for black people being treated like white people. But secondly, it is a right of an employer, for example, to say that, especially in the area where he came from, which is very multicultural, that if they have lots of non-white customers who are paying the bills, they're entitled, when they stop going to the company, to get rid of him because he called it into disrepute.
Tom Slater, do you think the man who flew the White Lives banner plane over that Burnley match should have been cancelled? Because I think he did lose his job. I don't closely remember that story, but I think he did lose his job, didn't he?
He did lose his job, and I don't think he should have been sacked over that. Because what Benjamin is basically saying is that bosses should have the right to hire and fire to sack people on the basis of their privately, or in this case publicly, expressed opinions outside of work. Now, I have no doubt that person in particular, you know, he's linked to Tommy Robinson. I'm sure he's a complete knucklehead, but that's not really the question here. The question is, should these people be hounded out of work on the basis of their opinions? And to be honest, we don't even have to go into the genuinely disgusting stuff or the genuinely controversial stuff. You know, if you think about that case from a couple of years ago, there was a guy who worked in an Asda in Yorkshire, he's a guy called Brian Leach. He shared a video of the Billy Connolly routine, which was taking the mick out of religion. It also took the mick out of jihadists. Someone on staff took offence to this, and he lost his job off the back of this. You know, there's been cases recently, a radio DJ on the Isle of Man who rubbished the idea of white privilege on his radio show, said nothing explicitly racist, just said he had an issue with that idea. He lost his job over that. He's now been reinstated, thankfully, after a huge backlash. But nevertheless, we're not talking here even about people who in their private lives or whatever are expressing genuinely ugly opinions. We're often talking about people who are just expressing an opinion which dissents from an incredibly narrow consensus. That's really how big this problem is.
Absolutely. And Benjamin, you raise newspapers, and obviously I'm executive editor at The Sun, and I have a big issue with that because regularly it's thrown in my face that I am trying to cancel someone or be nasty about someone, and I'm doing nothing of the sort. I am either writing a factually based story, or I am expressing an opinion backed up in fact, because that is what newspaper columnists do, and we actually put a lot of thought into what we write. And to conflate that with being a nasty Twitter troll throwing C words about at people, I think is a very different thing.
But you hit on a good point, which is, and I know working for a newspaper, that checking facts and making things sure that things are responsible to publish is a day-to-day decision. And I think ultimately that shows the point of knowing that there is a line in what you can publish and what you can't. If I sat here and said things that
but who's to say that J.K. Rowling has crossed the line? Because you disagree with her, you think she's crossed that line. But what she has said is not illegal. It is not hate speech. You have conceded that.
But she's peddling a hate that causes great hurt. And actually, of course, she hasn't been let from her publishers. That seems an extremely unlikely thing to happen. The only thing that's happened is that people have argued back. And I think that shows that we live in the full throttle of freedom of speech. We live in a society at the moment where a billionaire can express their opinion and people can argue back, and there can be consequences if people choose in a capitalist democratic society for that to happen. And this has always been the case. If someone called their employer into disrepute, which I'm sure is in every one of our employment contracts, if they went to a bar and got horrendously drunk or did something stupid, they offended someone from the business, people have got sacked for those things for as long as businesses have existed. The difference now is that people are standing up for them on social issues like trans people or racism. I think that's the shock to some people.
I'll give the final word to Tom Slater.
Well, I think it's interesting that Ben keeps focusing on the question of J.K. Rowling, because I think that's just a little bit of a straw man. There are people far less powerful than her who are being faced by this. And also, just listen to what he's saying. Bosses should be able to sack you on the basis of you saying slightly controversial things on the internet. That is a society that we're sleepwalking into, and it's not a free one.
And that is what will take away freedom of speech altogether, because people can't afford, especially right now, people cannot afford to take the risk of losing their job. Fascinating debate. That is Tom Slater, the deputy editor of Spiked Online, and before that, Benjamin Butterworth, the late editor of the iNewspaper. What do you reckon?